Hello everyone, welcome to back another conversational power episode. In this episode today, we are going to talk about Beijing's China's master plan, the recent development in Venezuela, and how all this geopolitical shifting, seismic shift, will affect the great power competitions over the planet Earth. As we discussed in international relations, in academia, and policy level over the last three decades or a few years, Beijing has quietly building its three massive master plans: one of the Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative. You might hear this discussion separately on the news, but today we are going to challenge that traditional view and to unpack all these details of China's master plans. Are these actually the separate three pillar, or designed to reshape the post 1945 international order? China's these massive plans, from offering a state-led alternative to the IMF, redefining the human rights, and separate modernization from the westernization. China is building a comprehensive ecosystem from Africa to Latin America, from the east to the west, and to digital and cyberspace, and to the sea, like the Silk Road and over the Land Belt and Road Initiative. And with the geopolitical shocks like the events taking place in Venezuela, are we witnessing a fragmentation of the world into two distinct blocks, between, on one side, China leading the global south, and on the other hand, US leading the Western world? To decode all this competition strategy and understand if China is seeking to reform the system or completely rebuild its alternative world order, I am today joining by Dr. Liang Fok Lee. We have 10 deep questions that cover everything from indivisible security to the battle for the discuss of power. Dr. Liang, he is the founder's associate at the Contemporary China Studies. He's also an associate senior fellow at the ECS Yusuf Ishaq Institute, Singapore-based. His research interests cover China's foreign policy and initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, Global Development Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, Global Security Initiative. He is particularly interested in China's engagement with Southeast Asia, especially China-Singapore relations. He was part of a team that conducted a review of China-Singapore Suzhou Industrial Park, the first government-to-government G2G project between the two countries. He follows developments on two other G2G projects, namely the Tianjin Eco City and Chongqing Connectivity Initiative. He was previously the coordinator of the Regional Security and Political Studies programs and coordinator of the Vietnam Studies program at ICS. Before ICS, he was a research fellow and assistant director at the East Asian Institute of the National University of Singapore. For several years, he managed the secretariat of the network of East Asian think tanks and network of ASEAN-China think tanks, and participated at these to track 1.5 forums to promote regional cooperation. Dr. Liang, welcome to my shows, and thank you joining me to share your insights with my audiences.
Thank you, Lokman, for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Dr. Liang, in academic circles, Beijing's three major initiatives, like namely GDI, GSI, GCI, are often viewed as separate pillars. So, however, when we analyze in depth as a collective master plan, we can see that. How do you interpret their synergy in reshaping the post-1945 international order? Is this the goal to reform existing multilateral institutions within, or to construct a parallel system of global governance that operate a fundamentally different than normative grounds that we are operating today?
Yes, Lokman, you have rightfully listed out the three key global initiatives which China formally announced in the early 2020s. More specifically, the GDI was announced and all three initiatives were announced by Chinese President Xi Jinping. The GDI was announced in 2021, the Global Security Initiative in 2022, and the Global Civilization Initiative in 2023. And were not launched quietly. They were actually launched at various international and regional
Loudly.
forums. Yes. For the Global Development Initiative, which was announced by Chinese President Xi Jinping, it was actually announced at the United Nations General Assembly, right? So it was a very international platform. And at the Global Security Initiative, it was announced when China hosted the annual Boao Forum. Again, a gathering of regional leaders, largely from Asia, and including Central Asia and South Asia. And then the Global Civilization Initiative was also announced by Chinese President Xi Jinping when China was hosting a forum on a dialogue on high-level political parties in Beijing. Right. So taken together, it would appear that there is a strong uh, state backing behind these three initiatives. But we must not forget that China took time to build these initiatives up, right? If you look back even further, it was in 2013 that China first announced the Belt and Road Initiative, again by Chinese President Xi Jinping. He announced the Silk Road Economic Belt when he visited Kazakhstan in September of 2013. And not long after, he traveled to Indonesia, and he was the first foreign leader to address the Indonesian parliament in October of 2013, where he announced the Maritime Silk Road. So at that time, when these initiatives were announced, I think it was a different world from the world that we are facing today. At that time, China itself was faced with a number of excess inventory. So its economy had a lot of excess capacities, especially in terms of construction materials. And there was a push for its companies to look outwards. And thereby, that was the domestic motivation for China in looking outwards to build infrastructure and to get involved in projects outside of China. So, but we look fast forward to current initiatives, the three initiatives that you have mentioned. There certainly is stronger uh, push behind these projects by Chinese President Xi Jinping, as well as his ministries and under his watch. And if I may add, there's also a fourth initiative, which was just announced in September 2025 last year, where Chinese President Xi Jinping talked about a global governance initiative. And in it, there were certain principles that they outlined, i.e., respect for sovereign equality, respect for rule of law, uh, upholding multilateralism, adopting a people-centered approach, as well as emphasis on delivering concrete results on the ground. So taken together, these are the four initiatives so far. And this initiative is particularly important, especially because it was announced after US President Trump came up with his Liberation Day tariffs, right? So this global governance initiative was announced in September of last year, and it basically stresses certain principles which I think most countries can identify with. You talk about respect for sovereign equality, yes, most countries can respect and identify that. Talk about respect for international law, most countries can identify and respect that. But I guess when you drill down to the details, then maybe there are differences of views and countries may disagree, right? So we will get into that as we go along.
And Dr.
And
Ling, yes, please go ahead.
yeah, sorry, on your part about how China is pushing it, I think there are two approaches. One is that it has come up with new institutions and revive institutions that it has a dominant role. For example, new institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank was a new institution created sometime around in 2015. And this comes after China's efforts to push for reforms in the IMF as well as the World Bank had limited results. And therefore, it came up with a new funding platform known as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in 2015. And before that, it created the Asian, there was also another fund created, the Silk Road Fund, known as the Silk Road Fund, created before the AIIB. And then it also had made a renewed push for existing institutions like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which existed before the Belt and Road was announced. And it, through these platforms, it pushed through it further emphasized the initiatives, especially the 3 initiatives that we just talked about. And the other approach that is adopted is that through international organizations like the UN, it has also pushed ahead with these 3 initiatives, i.e. Getting these 3 initiatives mentioned in international documents, and again, packaging China's contribution to UN peacekeeping operation as a major deliverable under these 3 key initiatives. So my short answer to your question is that it has pushed ahead to operationalize these initiatives through various international and regional platforms, some, and especially in those platforms where China has a very strong and dominant role.
And Dr. Ling, when we discussing the concept of the great power competitions, often the analyst or expert focuses on material capabilities like the military and economic power. So how does this 3 initiative represent a shift in China's strategy towards institutional power, specifically the ability to set rules and define the legitimacy in international behavior?
These initiatives are intended to cover a broad spectrum of activities, right? The GDI, which covers mainly economics. The Global Security Initiative is largely directed at security aspects, and the Global Civilization Initiative covers civilization-related issues, and maybe even people-to-people connectivity and even tourism, right? And then, of course, Global Governance Initiative, which is the latest one, talks about how China seeks to try to further democratize the international order, or even raise the voice and representation of the developing countries, i.e. what we have commonly defined as the Global South. I guess in terms of principle and the content, most countries, I think, especially with regards to the Global Development Initiative, they can identify with some of the key concepts, principles, like, for example, the Global Development Initiative talks about win-win cooperation, talks about working on common projects together to deliver tangible benefits on the ground. These broad concepts, I think countries can readily identify with. But however, when we try to drill down to the details, we may run into difficulties which require, let's say, China and the countries that host these projects to further discuss and further smooth out the rough edges and improve it over time. And it is the devil, as we say, is always in the details, right? For example, we talk about the port in Hambantota in
Sri Lanka.
In Sri Lanka, right? This was a project that was started way before the Belt and Road Initiative was announced, right? And then later on, in fact, Sri Lanka had first approached other partners before China to try to develop the port. And later on, it approached China and China came in, right? So there was some discussion earlier about whether this was a debt trap or not, right? And I think most observers now point out that actually it is not purely a debt for equity swap, right? Eventually, I think the agreement was that Sri Lanka has agreed to lease the port to a Chinese state-owned company for 99 years. But this was not there at the beginning. In fact, what we have to set in context is that certainly China has to bear some responsibility, i.e. in terms of doing better due diligence before it carry out the project. And perhaps sometimes when it carries out the project, it should keep a distance, the government should keep a distance between the companies that carry out this project, right? And stress that these projects ought to be run on a commercial basis. And this would reduce the risk that the government, the Chinese government have to bear if these projects fail. Right, so a lot of this, China has to bear responsibility, but I guess also the responsibility also weighs on the shoulders of the host country that shoulders this thing, these projects, i.e., the issue of governance, the issue of proper management on the ground, and how you structure your loans, and of course the project has a high construction cost which has yet to be repaid. But again, this high construction cost has to be set also in the context of Sri Lanka's already high debt burden, even before the project was, this port was constructed. So what I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, we have to look at the details in terms of whether they produce the outcome that will reinforce the concepts and ideas that China seeks to achieve through each of the initiatives that it has announced. And it is only through fine-tuning and improving on criticisms that it has received that that it can actually argue that, hey, we have actually made a real difference on the ground, and of course bring tangible benefits to the community in those countries that host this project.
And Doctor, the Global Development Initiative, which launched in 2021, closely aligns its rhetoric with the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So, do you see that the GDI's operational model differ from the Belt and Road Initiative, especially in terms of the project scale and financing? And does this shift suggest an adaptation to criticism regarding the debt sustainability in the developing world?
Yes, I agree with that view. And I had also earlier suggested we ought to take a longer term view in terms of how China has rolled out its initiatives. It was in 2013 that the President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative. And at that point in time, they were talking about the broad strokes, so to speak, the broad strokes of a painting. But now we see that they're talking more about more refined strokes that can eventually end up into a beautiful painting, right? And right now, what they are pursuing is a dual track approach. They are still continuing with the broad strokes, but emphasizing more on the small and so-called small and beautiful projects, aka the more refined strokes that will add further meat to the whichever projects they are undertaking. So to give an example, i.e., for example, the China-Laos Railway, which became operational in December of 2021. This is a very mega project which runs from Kunming to Vientiane. And it takes, and it's about more than 1,000 kilometers long. And of course, it's a very mega project. 4 stops in Laos, 4 stops in China itself. The small and beautiful projects involve those that are related to resettlement of villages, how China has helped Laos resettle the villages affected by the railroads, how China has helped the Laotian community in terms of building schools, ensuring that there are proper health care involved. So this, to the Chinese, they define this as small and beautiful projects. So if you look at it, you have a railway, and then you have issues that need tending as well, i.e. issues that are more closer to the heart of the local community being affected by this project. So by combining these two, the broad strokes and the small and beautiful projects, China is arguing that we have further improved upon the model. So by doing so, they are tacitly acknowledging that there were earlier criticisms of the broad strokes, and perhaps they should further tone down on not raising too much expectation about the deliverables. And so they come up with the small and beautiful project. Another innovation I think they have come up with to try to address some of the concerns by other host countries, as well as the concerns that the benefits to the local community in the host countries have been minimal, is they're setting up of this what is called as the Luban workshop. The Luban is a name of Chinese craftsmen in the spring and autumn period in China. And these essentially are vocational workshops which are set up across the developing countries, mainly in Asia and Africa, some in Europe as well. But essentially, they are set up to share some vocational skills to the local residents, i.e., for example, if you have a railway running through, a particular Luban workshop will focus on training local residents to how to manage the railway, expecting them to graduate and eventually be part of the railway that China has constructed, and therefore answering a criticism that it does not benefit the local community. So we see China trying to improve its approaches as it goes along and trying to fill in the gaps, so to speak.
And Doctor, a key component of the Global Development Initiative is the emphasis on state-led development paths over the market liberalization models traditionally promoted by the IMF or the World Bank. So, to what extent is that model gaining traction in the global south as a viable alternative for modernization, particularly in regions where the Western conditionalities are viewed as intrusive?
Yes, I think to some extent there is some traction there, right? That Chinese commitment that's in these countries comes with less strings attached, irregardless of the regime types. The Chinese is ready to help countries grow and develop. So there's some attractiveness there. But however, I think we have to be careful because if we go for a purely state-driven approach, i.e., it is decided by the governments of the day with very little inputs from the ground, especially the private sector or various other groups, social groups or environmental groups on the ground, then it could really lead to problems in terms of when it comes to actual implementation. I give you an example. There was a project that was much hyped, which is known as the Malacca Gateway, which is in Malacca in Malaysia. Right at its height, it was touted as a mega project that will comprise a cruise center. There will also be a deep sea port. There will also have an industrial park component. There will also have retail and commercial space. It was branded as a very mega project with high-end lifestyle that will benefit the people involved there, right? And it involved actually reclaiming 3 artificial islands and building on 1 already existing island. So 4 islands are involved. Right? So it was a grand plan, was announced to much fanfare. But later on, it went into project delays. There were issues, and then COVID came. It further delayed the project. There was also resettlement issues, reclamation challenges. And then it was rehashed again in 2023, right, into a much scaled down project that only involved the completion of a cruise center. So if this project had been conceived at the beginning by bringing on board the relevant stakeholders, especially the private sector who would know better the viability of such projects, and also taking into consideration how this project will fit into the overall development plan of Malaysia, because as you know, Malacca is on the west coast of Peninsular Malaysia. It is close to Port Klang, another port, important port, which also is interested in developing a cruise center. And then further up north on Peninsular Malaysia, we have Penang, which is already a notable cruise center. So how the upcoming cruise center in this Malacca can be complementary to Penang or even Port Klang. I think that part is still awaits further discussion and integration. So if there had been the relevant stakeholders involved in the beginning, then we could actually at the beginning have a more refined and focused project. So it is very important, I guess, apart from official backing, to have community engagement. And community here, I mean engagement with the relevant stakeholders, i.e. the private sector, and even environmental groups, because you are talking about land reclamation, creating 3 artificial islands, and building on 1 existing island. All this would have environmental impact, an impact on local fishing, villages would depend on fishing in that area. So it is very important to include all this. So therefore, it is a mere state-centered approach may not work in today's world. So it has to combine a state-centered approach with engagement of the relevant stakeholders involved.
And moving to the security domain, the Global Security Initiatives was introduced with the core concept of the indivisible security. From an international relations perspective, how does the concept challenge the US-led alliance system? And what practical mechanisms, such as police cooperation or intelligence sharing, is Beijing using to operationalize its vision in the world?
Yes, the Global Security Initiative, as we have mentioned, was formally raised by President Xi Jinping in 2022 at a Boao Forum in Hainan. But we can even look further back to 2014, when Chinese President Xi Jinping chaired the conference on interaction and confidence building measures. I think it was held in Shanghai at that time, involving about 40 to 50 countries at that time. And at that time, that concept, we talk about indivisible security. At that time, it was also talked about as indivisible security, i.e. the concept of common security, cooperative security, sustainable security. So these concepts, you see that they are still being stressed in the current Global Security Initiative that was announced in 2022. But at that time, the context was different. When the Chinese leader talked about a common, cooperative, comprehensive, and sustainable concept, he actually was talking about what we then describe as Asia for Asia. He said essentially that the Asian countries have the capability and wherewithal to manage their own security issues. In other words, he's saying that the Western world, keep out of our area, i.e. ACA, the Western world meaning the US, keep out of our area. So that part was more exclusive in nature, right? Exclusive. But if you look at it now, this concept of global security initiative is international in nature and global. If the US wants to be part of it, it is part of it. If China is saying that if the US wants to be part of it, then part of it. But if you don't want to be part of it, then so be it, right? And this thing, they have tried to push it through and operationalize it at various international and regional platforms. For example, at the United Nations, they have officially stated that we are the most, we contribute the most peacekeeping troops among the P5 members. You know that China is very actively involved in peacekeeping operations in Africa, in countries like South Sudan, Mali, Democratic Republic of Congo, and even in Lebanon, and things in Cyprus as well. So China is saying that, and its presence there is more in a non-combat role, i.e. Providing medical aid, maybe combat engineers, maybe trying to enforce law enforcement. And the other platform that China has stressed, which emphasizes its role in operationalizing the Global Security Initiative, is actually its anti-piracy operations off the coast of Somalia. To give a bit of context, this anti-piracy operation that China got involved in off the coast of Somalia started way back under then Chinese President Hu Jintao's time, sometime in December 2008. So at that time, they were talking about a group of countries coming together under UN aegis to fight piracy and to ensure that food is delivered to the countries in Somalia, right? And fast forward now to today, China now has included its anti-piracy operation as a key manifestation of how China is operationalizing the Global Security Initiative, i.e. Up to today, China says that we are participating in this anti-piracy operation to keep sea lanes of communications open, i.e. it is a public good that China is delivering and contributing to the international community. We are also trying to ensure that the supplies, food supplies or trade in goods are delivered safely. And they have also included a Taiwan angle as well, i.e. our ships also help to conduct ensure safe passage of Taiwanese vessels across the high seas, So there's a Taiwan angle here as well, but essentially speaking, they are using all these platforms to try to give meat to the Global Security Initiative. And of course, it also includes China has also included how it has helped to play a role to resolve disputes and conflicts, i.e. the most popular example that we can come up with is, of course, China has always said that we have played a role to try to bridge to improve ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran, right? And of course, we can argue that earlier on, Oman and Iraq play a very critical role in bringing Saudi Arabia and Iran together. But China had also played a role towards the end to facilitate this reconciliation. And most recently, of course, China has also said that we have played a role in bringing about a renewed ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia. Right? We early on we saw that especially last year. In July, the two countries signed a ceasefire agreement. At that time, the ceasefire agreement was signed in Kuala Lumpur, together in the presence of US and China representatives sitting at the sidelines at the signing ceremony. But then in October, Trump made a very high-profile visit to attend the ASEAN summit in Malaysia, and he presided over this signing of the joint declaration between Thailand and Cambodia. And glaringly, China was left out, right, at the specific instruction, as I understand, of the US. But later on, conflict broke out again in December last year. And in the latest diplomatic shuttle diplomacy, China met up with the representatives of Thailand and Cambodia, and in particular, Foreign Minister Wang Yi actually had a meeting with his counterparts after they agreed that they will try to work on restoring peace. And China has in fact gone beyond the ceasefire agreement to say that the three countries have actually agreed on further measures to resettle their population, to build, to restore calm, to restore peace and stability. And China says that we will also be keen to help in demining operations going forward. So this was held up by China as an example of how it has played a role to manage disputes between its two neighbors to the south, particularly in South Asia, which it regards as a very important region for China. So these are examples I have mentioned here to show that China is pushing on all fronts, international, regional, bilateral fronts, to try to showcase that it is playing a role to add meat to its global security initiative. But at the end of the day, I think, again, the devil is still in its details, right? Because if we look at other examples, like the example of Ukraine, you would that there's a glaring element here in that China has not called out Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. It has not condemned Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. And yet China at the same time has condemned the United States for its military operations in Venezuela. So if China says that we take sovereign equality to its very letter, whether you're a big country, rich or poor, strong or weak, sovereign equality applies to all countries. So it should have condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine if we take it as at face value, right? But of course, China has other considerations, and this may have explained why it has not come out openly to criticize Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. So again, when we look
Doctor,
at
from here,
specific,
yeah,
yes,
as I just want to point another differences between the US-led security initiative frameworks and this China's-led security initiatives. For example, the GCI, as you mentioned, emphasize non-interference and legitimate security of all nations. But given the recent US operation in Venezuela, how Beijing can effectively serve as a counter narrative? Does it offer partner nations a tangible security guarantee, or does it function primarily as a diplomatic framework to delegitimize the unilateral US or Western countries' interventions? How Beijing will distinguish itself or give more guarantee to the hosting nations, partner nations?
yes, I think that's a very good question. It cuts to the chase of the matter. With regards to Venezuela example, I think there's very little that China can do in terms of the security and military front. You would remember that 1 or 2 days after US took action in Venezuela, at a press briefing chaired by the China Foreign Ministry, a reporter asked the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman, saying that China has also supplied some military equipment to Venezuela. And how would the Foreign Ministry spokesman assess the effectiveness of these Chinese military equipment? To be expected, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson did not answer the question directly. But we know that China has supplied early warning radar systems to Venezuela, which apparently was not that effective in the latest action against America's actions in Venezuela. So this raises questions about the effectiveness of a role that China, or the type of guarantee that China can provide. Okay, we could also ask, maybe it is Venezuela that has not managed this equipment well and not fully integrated the early warning radar into its defense systems or defense network. But at the end of the day, Venezuela is too far away for China to have effective force projection. And therefore, I think with regards to the Venezuelan example, we see more of China trying to take the diplomatic high ground. You can see its media as well as officials going all out to criticize the US for such illegal actions, which are against international law and contravenes so the sovereignty of other countries. So that is a messaging that we see most at the moment. In terms of specific guarantees, I tend to see very little of that at the moment. And I think, again, at the end of the day, countries must be comfortable in terms of working with China on the military and security front in order to go beyond such cooperation to have some form of guarantee, right? So at the moment, I think countries in Southeast Asia are involved in military exercises with the various arms of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. Again, these are incremental steps to try to build some form of trust and confidence between the PLA and the respective arms in the host countries. So these are just baby steps, incremental steps at the moment. And I do not see much of countries at the moment further cementing their ties in the form of, up to the stage of some form of guarantee.
And Doctor, the most recent pillar of this China's master plan is the Global Civilization Initiative. The GSI posits that modernization doesn't equal to westernization. So how do you see this initiative attempt to decouple the concept of modernity from liberal democratic values, and what role does it play in building a normative consensus among the non-Western states like Global South?
Yes, you have rightly pointed out that in pushing ahead with the Global Civilization Initiative, China's key thrust is that various civilizations, which includes various countries, have their right to decide on their own development path, and that westernization, modernization is not the sole prerogative of Western countries. And China itself has held up its own model of development as a key expression of how successful it has been in carving a path that is distinct from that of the West. It often cites how it has uplifted so many millions, 800 million people out of poverty, and how it has managed to achieve economic growth for the past, high economic growth for the past few decades. Of course, now growth has slowed down, but it has continued to try to identify new sources of growth. But to countries, let's say in this part of the world where I am, we are more concerned about growth and moving forward on the basic, on our existing basis. So whichever country that can value add to our existing level of growth, be it China, be it Japan, be it Korea, or be it the European countries, or be it the United States. I suppose countries are very open to finding the right partners for the areas that they want to develop and grow as well. So I think China's emphasis on westernization, modernization is not the sole prerogative of the West, and that China has its own development path, and the countries should look to China for new experiences, may have some traction. But at the end of the day, I think most countries are clear that in order to grow, they need to find relevant partners for their growth strategy. Be it, even if it comes from China, so be it. If it comes from the West, so be it. But the ultimate thing is that the countries can adapt the best practices from across the world to help their own countries develop and prosper. I think that is at least what I see in most of the people I've interacted with in this part of the world.
And in the context of the discourse power, how do you see the Global Civilization Initiative will facilitate China's efforts to redefine universal values such as human rights by prioritizing the collective rights and civilizational diversity over individual political rights?
Yes, civilization by itself is a loaded term, it seems to me. For China, you can talk about a long civilization, right? More than 5,000 years of history. Maybe India, you can also talk about long civilization. But if for America, I don't see the Americans talking about long civilization. In fact, they only have a few hundred years of America. And even for countries in Southeast Asia, we achieve our Singapore and other countries in Southeast Asia, we achieve our independence after some years after the Second World War, and we have no so-called civilization to speak of. We are newly independent states, if we take reference to our independence years after the Second World War. So civilization, I think, means countries need to define what civilization is, and that is where I see maybe countries may not see eye to eye with China in terms of the definition of civilization, what this actually means. And of course, and China also talks about this, but if you talk about, let's say, people-to-people exchange, tourism exchange, then maybe countries can readily identify with, let's say, people-to-people exchange to promote more understanding of each other's cultures, each other's preferences. And you talk about tourism exchange to promote tourism, earn hard currency. I think maybe countries can better identify with that because these are more concrete examples and quantifiable matters which countries can measure and bring about tangible benefits in terms of tourism receipts, in terms of, let's say, media cooperation among the media groups, how to promote each other's cultural products in each other countries. I think these are more tangible things. I think if we are talking about that, then I think most countries can readily identify with those issues and those methods. And actually, if you look at all the initiatives that China has announced, I would say that the Global Development Initiative, in relative terms, has greater traction, right? Because it talks about essentially it talks about economic cooperation, right? Mutual benefit. The benefits cannot be equally shared, but at least some countries earn more, other countries earn less. But that is the reality of economic in terms of trade and investment relationship. Some countries have trade surplus in goods, some countries have deficit in goods. The same applies to trade in services as well. So when we talk about that, these are more quantifiable examples. And I would say that most countries can identify more with the GDI, as opposed to maybe the GSI, which is security aspect, which I think there's some concerns there, issues of trust and confidence. Global Civilization Initiative, there are some issues with definition. But as I mentioned, if you talk about people-to-people connectivity, tourism, then maybe there's some degree of identification there. So it really depends on what initiative we are talking about. And within each initiative, we have to look at the specific project, the conditions in each country, which are very different. And before we can have a more accurate analysis.
And look, when we look at the integration of these three initiatives, we saw a comprehensive ecosystem from development to security and to values. So how do you see this trinity alter the strategic calculus for middle powers in Latin America and Africa who are navigating the intensifying competition between Washington and Beijing?
Well, Trinity suggests that it is a very seamless set of strategies carried out seamlessly. As I mentioned, certainly there's some appeal, especially in terms of the principles that is being touted. But at the end of the day, I would say that we have to be cautious and look at the specifics of the issues at hand. Right? For example, another example that I would like to raise here is the example of the East Coast railway line in Malaysia. Lokman, you are familiar with Malaysia. You have been there for a few years as well as far as I understand. So you will know that this East Coast railway line was also launched with great fanfare. Sometime in I think officially launched in 2017 when Prime Minister Najib was then the Prime Minister. It ran into issues later on. There was a change of government, 2018, there was a change of government. The project was halted on the basis that it was too high a cost. There was little benefit to the Malaysian side. And then there was a review. Much discussion followed, and eventually they decided that there was a need to reduce the costs, upfront costs. There was some realignment in terms of the rail network. There was also an effort to involve more Malaysian stakeholders in carrying out this project. So right now, this project is online. It is online again, and it is more than 80% completed. It is supposed to be operational by, I think, early part of 2027. Right? Essentially, this East Coast Railway line will link the western part of Peninsular Malaysia at Port Klang. We mentioned Port Klang earlier, which is close to the north of Malacca, to the eastern part of Peninsular Malaysia, Kuantan Port, right, east to west. And then from Kuantan Port, it moves northwards to Kota Baru in Kelantan. It's supposed to cut traveling time from Port Klang to Kota Baru from 7 hours to 4 hours. And it's also supposed to facilitate shipping. If you want to ship your goods from the west coast of Peninsular Malaysia to the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia and onward to, let's say, China, you can do that. At least that is what is envisioned. And some have said that this will reduce China's need to go through Singapore, right? But we have to wait and see how this thing pans out, right? How it will benefit the commuters, and more importantly, how it will benefit businesses. Because we are not just talking about hard infrastructure. At the end of the day, everything has to work. It's hard infrastructure, how you integrate into the overall national development plans of Malaysia, and also how, in terms of the software part, you make it as seamless as possible for both consumers and, more importantly, for businesses, so that they will want to ride on this East Coast railway line and make it commercially viable for them to do so. So certainly the three trinities that we talk about, the Trinity has its draw, but again, I will caution that we really have to look at how it is being operationalized in the respective countries and how it actually benefits, more importantly, the local communities, which at the end of the day are closest to such projects, and it has a direct impact on the quality of life of the local community. So yeah.
And Doctor, just a last questions. When we look at to the recent development and current geopolitical landscape marked by events like the U.S. intervention in Venezuela and the expansion of the Chinese initiatives, on other hand, so are we witnessing the crystallization of two distinct international orders, or specifically is the global system fragmenting into a US-led security bloc and a China-led development security bloc, or is a reality more fluid? What is your observation and point of view?
That is a good question. I do not see a clear bifurcation between a US bloc and China bloc. What I do see is that many countries would want to continue to engage the US, and at the same time, they will also want to continue to engage China, so to speak. And it is not just these two big powers, right? Many other countries will also like to engage countries in Europe, countries in Oceania, including Australia, New Zealand. So rather than see it as a clear bifurcation, I would say that countries are motivated to try to find to strengthen existing linkages with their key partners, but at the same time try to build new networks with markets that they don't traditionally pay attention to. Like, for example, in the case of Singapore, we continue to value our ties to the US. As you are fully aware, the US is the largest investor in Southeast Asia, and a large proportion of this investment is in Singapore. Singapore continues to value this aspect of America's economic engagement with Southeast Asia, especially with Singapore. At the same time, we are also very strong security partners of the US. During the Trump 1.0 administration in 2019, our government signed with the US government a MOU to renew our Singapore's facilities access for US naval and air presence in Singapore, access to our facilities in Singapore, thereby enabling the US to have a continued presence in the Indo-Pacific region. We believe that the US continues to play a role, a valuable one, to contribute to the peace and stability of the region. At the same time, we are also very keen to further strengthen our ties with China, as you have mentioned in the introduction. Introduction to myself, we are very actively involved on both the private sector and the G2G front. But I will just talk about the G2G, government-to-government front, in the form of the 3 projects, which started first with the Suzhou Industrial Park, where we allow or enable companies through Singapore to look to China as a big market, to spread their wings and thereby generate more economic opportunities, not only for Singapore companies, but for companies who are based in Singapore and are interested to look beyond Singapore to the Chinese markets. And right now, with the Chinese companies facing restrictions going to the US and to some extent to Europe, the Chinese companies are more interested in looking at how they can expand their presence in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia. And Singapore welcomes them to come to Singapore, and even from Singapore to look beyond to other parts of Southeast Asia. So this is how we try to plug ourselves and remain relevant to both the US as well as to China, as well as to many other countries like Japan, maybe also India. And we are also looking at new linkages with countries in Africa. Singapore government plans to have a new embassy in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. This was announced last year when our Singapore Prime Minister visited there. We are exploring new markets. We already have embassies in Pretoria in South Africa, as well as in Egypt, Cairo. So this upcoming embassy in Addis Ababa will be the first in the eastern part of Africa. And Singapore is keen to...
Ethiopia also is a landlocked country, and yes, nowadays it tries to access the sea. It will be interesting to to make a partnership with the Singapore.
Yes, so traditionally we will not look at that part, but because the global landscape has changed, it has become much more challenging. So it behoves smaller countries, including Singapore, to try to be creative and innovative in their approach, to source for new markets, to find new partners, to continue to drive their economy forward, upgrade their economies, and sustain growth into the foreseeable future. So that is what I believe countries in the region are looking at. And also when Malaysia was the chair of ASEAN, you will recall that ASEAN held the first ASEAN Gulf Cooperation Council plus China Summit. So ASEAN is trying to bring together its own big market in ASEAN, plus already the big market and the financial resources that China has, together with the technologies that the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, as well as the financial prowess of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. We try to marry the strength of these different regions and see what opportunities we can come up and secure. So these are some of the new approaches that even ASEAN is exploring. At the same time, ASEAN is also trying to go for greater integration in terms of removing the non-tariff barriers, which continues to impede further trade and investment between the ASEAN countries. And we are very keen to also look at new and emerging areas like green economy, digital economy, and of which our key partners have their strengths, including Japan, Korea, even the US, and also including China. So these are some of the areas that we believe can fuel growth as traditional sectors wane. We're also looking at AI, data centers, semiconductors, which have been identified as new growth areas. So, response back to your question, new networks are being formed, existing networks are being strengthened, new and emerging areas are being identified. So it is a rich tapestry of networks rather than a clear bifurcation into the US bloc or China bloc, so to speak.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ling, for joining me from Singapore today and discussing with me about the internet critical point of the Beijing's master plan and how it will affect by the global developments such as Venezuela. Thank you for your rich experience you share with my audiences and spare your time.
Thank you very much, Lokman. Pleasure to be here, as I said, as mentioned.
And thank you very much. Thank you also for my audiences. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and join our growing expert community. Yeah, I'm unbiased channel. Try to discuss most critical developments around the world in depth by inviting experts. Your support will be bring us to the new expert, to the new point, new topics. Please subscribe our channel, and if you value our work, support us by buy a coffee and share with your network. Please see you for upcoming more amazing live stream about geopolitical developments around the world. And
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.